Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for joining us for the first of maybe many academic hours on Medium. Really excited about our conversation today. So grateful to have about 120 people so far on the other end. I'm Scott Lamb, the VP of Content here at Medium, and just to give a little context of kind of why we're here today before we get into the main seminar, and I'll bring out our panelists in just a moment. But we at Medium have been talking to academic writers a lot recently and trying to understand their struggles, their challenges, kind of what it is that they're looking for. For those of you who aren't super familiar with Medium, and I hope there are a number of you who are here today to explore and learn a little bit more, we're a reading and writing platform. And I think the thing that we're most focused on right now is how do we bring our very simple tool set and our distribution to more people who want to write and reach an audience. And when we talk to academics, we know this is a struggle. A lot of academic writing never even sees the light of day. And when it does, it's often reaching a smaller, more niche audience. It can be that when it breaks out into a larger audience, that it's misunderstood and not really well followed. And we want to solve those problems for academics. We want to be a place for simple publishing. If you have ideas that they can get out to the people who are interested in them very easily and quickly, and that you can reach a readership that you're looking for. So we're going to talk about all of those things today. We have a number of distinguished guests who are here with us who have been using Medium for academic purposes, but in different ways over the course of their time on Medium. And we'll get to hear their experience and how they've approached that, solving some of those problems. Really excited but I'll introduce them in a moment. A few housekeeping items up top. I've got some questions for our panelists, so we're going to have a discussion for about 30 minutes of our time here today. And then we're going to turn it over to the audience and have a Q&A for 10 to 15 minutes. We'll see how that piece goes. For the Q&A section, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little question mark icon and the words Q&A. Put your questions in for the panelists in there. Our team is going to be going through and we'll be looking for questions and select a few. If we choose your question, we are going to call you up on the stage to ask it. So don't be nervous about that part. It's going to be very straightforward, like any Zoom that you've been on before. But it will just give you the opportunity to kind of come up on stage and ask your question and interact with the audience. We want, with the panelists, we want that interaction to be a part of the event for today. When you do get called up on stage, my only ask is get to the part with the question mark as quickly as you can. Also, you will see there's a chat. Please use the chat. It's there for you to interact with other members of the audience. But again, keep your questions in the Q&A section. And also note the usual Medium rules apply. That keep it civil. We're going to be keeping an eye on the chat, make sure that it stays on topic and stays kind. That's important to us as well. What else do I have for you? You'll also notice at the bottom a resources tab. It's just popped up with the Medium rules there. We'll be putting in some notifications throughout the course of the discussion today that will take you to links with more information. It may be a profile of one of the panelists that we have today, and other further resources. There's also a PDF in there that talks a lot about the world of academic writing and Medium. Don't worry. We will also be emailing all of this information to all of the attendees, so you'll have that for to look at after the event. And I think that's it for housekeeping. I want to switch over to start introducing our lovely group of panelists here today. First up is Carin-Isabel Knoop. She's an executive director at the Harvard Business School and uses Medium to transform her case study research into readable, relatable stories for wider distribution and reach. Hello, Carin.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Carin's work leans towards topics of compassionate leadership and inclusive, honest professional environments. Carin, I read your stuff often. It's been very useful in my work at Medium, so grateful to have you joining us for today. And Carin's been on Medium since 2020. Up next, we have Enrique Dans, who is the professor of innovation at the IE Business School. And he uses Medium to create topical discussions on current events for his students and a wider audience. I also read, Enrique, I read your work often in my daily life as well. So grateful to have you here.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. Enrique's work leans towards tech topics, often is also bilingual. Enrique published in both English and Spanish, which is awesome to see. And Enrique's been on Medium since the beginning, I think, since 2012. So grateful to have you here. Nice to see you again. Lastly, we have Rebecca Ruth Gould, who is a professor of comparative poetics and global politics at the University of London. She's a Boost nominator, if you're familiar with that program, and the editor of the scholarly Medium publication, Global Literary Theory. Her work is centered on the intersection of poetry and politics, with a regional focus on Iran, Islam, the Caucasus, and Palestine. And she's been on Medium since 2017. Rebecca, great to connect with you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here.
Well, we have so much that we could cover, and not all the time in the world. So I want to just jump right into it with a group question, and maybe we can sort of go in reverse order of how I introduced you and start with Rebecca. But I'm curious how you approach writing about academic topics on Medium. Kind of what's your way into using the platform?
Yeah, so it's been really a kind of eye-opening and incredibly empowering experience to have the option of sharing my work more broadly, my scholarly work. I'd say I have developed a little bit of a kind of workflow. It obviously it's hard to just generalize to every single thing I write, but I'd say with like my best experiences, it's a case where I'm working on a piece of scholarship, and it involves a lot of footnotes, a lot of documentation. But at the same time as I'm writing that, and sometimes, for those of us who do write scholarship, peer-reviewed scholarship, it's parts of this process can be kind of a little bit boring, dare I say. And so I always have in the back of my mind, like the Medium article that eventually will come out of that at some at a later stage. And sometimes that means like I'll even keep two files going at the same time. So, one's is like the main scholarship with all the documentation. But then when I come across a paragraph that I really love, that just really speaks to my heart and represents what I want to say in a sort of broad way, like I put that in the other file. Maybe I'll start of a draft on Medium. And so for me, it does require a little bit of multitasking, I suppose. I sort of think in advance about sort of pitching what I'm writing to two kinds of audiences. Yeah, I think that kind of describes my workflow.
That's super interesting. So it sounds like Medium is sort of, or you're at least thinking about the audience piece in this really
Exactly.
kind of in the beginning. That's fascinating.
It is true. Yeah.
Cool. Enrique, what about you?
In my case, I teach innovation. So the fact when you teach innovation is extremely, horizontal. It's all over the place. So choosing your topics is not trivial. I mean, you cannot be an expert in every topic in innovation. It's completely impossible. But you want, or you need, in my case, if you're teaching, for instance, MBAs or masters in management, you need to entertain a wide array of topics. So when I discovered the blog, I realized that blogging or writing an article was a phenomenal way for me to prepare things, to get ready for a class. So basically, the first point is to learn the what's out there. Okay, who's talking about this, or what type of participation do I get? Comments, reactions. For that, when I started on Medium, because I was teaching mostly in Spanish, and then my university started to internationalize a lot, and I started to teach mostly in English. Now they don't even allow me to teach in Spanish anymore because there are some professors who cannot teach in English, and the most of the sessions in Spanish, well, we don't have that many sessions in Spanish, but most of them are reserved for these professors who struggle with English. So now I'm teaching in English all the time, and for me, Medium was a huge surprise because, when you blog in Spanish and you become one of the first bloggers in technology and this type of technology, innovation, etc., and you find yourself all of a sudden well-known or amassing some audience, etc., and you suddenly start in English, you don't expect to find such an audience because there's a lot of people in the English-speaking world talking about or writing about the things I write, and many of them are way better, way more advanced, they're more better informed than myself. It even gave me that audience. So for me, the challenge of writing an article to publish it on Medium forces me to document the article, to find interesting links, and also to find these first comments and reactions, which is kind of something that I can expect later on when I discuss the article in my class.
Fascinating. Huh. Well, I want to get into the way in which you use it with your students in a little bit more depth. But Carin, I'm curious for you. How do you approach your writing on Medium and use the tool?
So it's interesting, Rebecca talked about her toggling between her, scholarly work and then keeping in mind how she would talk to another audience. I heard Enrique sort of think about, what are the topics that I'm going to choose? And I think for me, one of the great things about Medium has been to think about with whom I'm going to be writing. And so I have a very emotional relationship to Medium because when the pandemic came and I said, how are we going to manage people? I work at a business school. What's going to happen to us? A friend suggested that I start writing. And I think that Medium was a form to journal, what is going on in the world and how is it changing? And my first instinct was, how can I find people who have been through these situations before? So I think one of my early articles on Medium was somebody who had been in the armed forces. And I was like, let's write about, for managers, how do you, navigate without sight? What happens when nothing is as it seems, when there's a lot of risk and uncertainty? And then from there, I was like, oh, I'll go and talk to musicians about how they're handling the pandemic. So one of the beauties, I think, of Medium is that it's a place that enables you to have these conversations of a multidisciplinary nature and to think about, with whom would you want to interact in order to write? And then I think the comment function has been wonderful because it is a place where people will react and will say, oh my gosh, I'm also scared about COVID. And then 4 years later is, we're writing about climate distress. People are sharing resources. This is what we're doing for firefighters. So I think it's a platform that enables individuals who can be stuck in one unit or one discipline to think broadly about how they bring these voices and people to the conversation.
That's really wonderful to hear. I think the piece that stood out from me from what you just said really is about community. And I think when the platform is working as intended and really in its ideal form, it's exactly that it's not just you're publishing things into the void or you're publishing things and you can see from the stats that people are reading them, but that you actually get engagement and there's conversation happening, and the response section is a big part of that. That's wonderful to hear. Well, I'm curious. I have a few specific questions for each of you, and then we can do another group question. But Carin, maybe kind of taking what you just said and running with it a little bit. I'm curious, what best practices of storytelling and research do you bring into your work on Medium? It sounds like that's like a big orienting principle for you in thinking about using the platform that maybe other academics on the call could learn from.
Yeah, I think this rejoins also, Rebecca's power on Medium, which is to think what is in research. So I come from research, which is what is research around, navigating under stress, what is research around compassionate management, and then how will I tell these stories, either through a personal anecdote or through the story of an individual, and then always connected back to research. I think there are a lot of places on Medium that are very wonderful for first-person narratives. It's not the kind of writing that I've been doing. A lot of the facts I source. So I see it as an opportunity to combine narrative and also come up with, either individuals who move us. I've written about my parents' teddy bear and how they used it to negotiate conflicts. So it can be a little bit creative. Usually there is something that precipitates it, a theme I go back to. But the theme is really a more or less a closing line in order to hang some pieces of research that I think would be helpful to people and to people engaging. And then in most of the posts that we have shared on Medium, we've had some questions or frameworks 2 or 3 takeaways that people could then come back and either practice. So it's very practice oriented, and this may reflect my world. So I'm a case writer at Harvard Business School. We really bridge management education and leadership practice through the writing of case studies, which are about decisions that people are making. So I think that in a lot of our posts, there's been something that the protagonist is struggling with and is trying to solve. So it's very practice oriented in a way.
I love that.
If you don't mind my a little interruption from me, the storytelling part is crucial. That you have to be comfortable with it. I mean, in my case, I write a lot. I write an article a day, and I've been writing an article a day for 21 years. So if you're not comfortable, it's not sustainable. If it takes you a lot of time to come up with the style or all this or structure it, etc., it's not sustainable. So you have to be you. It's extremely important that you feel comfortable writing. I write articles in a very, very short time. It takes me more time. It takes me longer to research for the article or to come up with the idea for the article than to write it. Writing it right now comes like boom, so automatism.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's certainly something we see that's successful on Medium, kind of regardless of topic or genre, and it's obviously much broader than Medium as well. That storytelling is an essential tactic to get people to follow you, to go on the journey and really deeply understand what it is that you're talking about. Rebecca, I'm just curious, does that show up in your work as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think point where I want to chime in is to do with the comments that I've received or that actually contributors to my publication have received, because I naturally would compare it to peer review, the peer review process, in which in the academic context, we do as academics get very good and detailed feedback. But the big difference between that type of feedback and the type of feedback on Medium is that it is, in the academic context, it's so professionalized and it's anonymized, and it's like by design. You have no way of going back to that person. You have no way of continuing the conversation. And I mean, while there is obviously a certain value to that because it avoids conflicts of interest and, protects a certain kind of rigor, from a kind of personal fulfillment perspective, I mean, it can be a bit, I don't know, lonely or kind of disorienting. And so Medium is in the positive sense, it really complements that. And I find, some of the comments I've received on, and not just me, but in my publication, have been just really in depth and extraordinary, even comparable, to a peer review. But the thing is, the big difference is that it's actually a human being, who you're interacting with. And so, yeah, that I think that also enriches the storytelling experience. But that is really what's something that's distinctive about writing on Medium for me.
Yeah, I don't see Medium as an academic journal. I mean, there's no peer review, and they could organize it. You guys at Medium could organize something like this if you wanted to. And considering how problematic are some of the journals nowadays, considering all these issues going on with the prestige of the journals, it could be a very interesting initiative. But I see it more like if I publish something academic on a journal, then I use Medium to explain it, to collaborate, to get insights about it. It's more like another way to another channel for my research with different characteristics.
The other beauty, just picking up on Rebecca, on the other extreme, is that you can also share on platforms like LinkedIn. But then in LinkedIn, you get all caught up with the posturing that occurs because, it's a professional platform and people are trying to sell themselves. They're usually under their real names. And so some of the great interactions and people that I've wound up collaborating with, at the business school or as a writer, have been under Happy Surfer. And then you realize, it's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company who's there. So I've loved that, in a way, it's one of these very rare marketplaces of ideas and emotions where people are there from all over the world, all over the classes, and are not trying to present as something. It feels much less transactional in a way, which I think is really very productive for academics.
And it's not any place. I mean, it's a place with a certain prestige. I mean, many, I don't know, from politicians to big prominent figures having writing on Medium. So you get some sort of, academic authority. When you write on Medium and you're able to get a dialogue going on, etc., then this idea of being more like visible allows you to, I don't know, if you want to call a company and say, hey, I'm this guy, I teach here, I've been writing on Medium, you can see some examples of my research. Would you open the doors if I want data for my research, for instance? And that's interesting. It opens a lot of doors in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting to hear. I feel like there's a thread here of the value that the three of you find in really the feedback loop that Medium provides. That it's different, obviously, than academic journals and working within the academy. Also different than maybe other forms of social media. That there's just a different type of conversation that can help drive your thinking forward or open up new areas of discussion. So that's really interesting to hear. I think maybe on that point, Rebecca, I had a question for you about how you use Medium as part of your research projects. I think you have a very particular approach there.
Yeah, I think it was a bit serendipitous as well.
Mm,
So I have a big project that is also the name of my what I edit on journal that I edit on Medium called Global Literary Theory, and it did begin as literally just a research project funded by the European Commission, ERC, and I was having all of these by its design. It was an international project with 20 or 30 people representing from 20 to 30 countries writing very, very kind of specialized academic work. But some of them, it occurred to me I was already publishing my stuff on Medium separately. And I realized like it's worth trying and putting some of the materials that we're producing as a research team onto Medium. And one thing that surprised me, and at first it was kind of just for ourselves, and just to kind of have it out there. But suddenly, like people started commenting, even if it was the topics, even if the subjects of what was being published was pretty niche, it found an audience, remarkably. If it was particularly because like we publish a lot to do with, say, Pakistani poetry or Indian literatures or things that might in sort of the English speaking world might seem very niche, but actually they're actually not that niche, within the cultures that are being written about. And so it found an audience and it gradually began to grow. And then actually the project itself ended, and I began opening it up to contributors on Medium. And so, yeah, and so I think right now we have a kind of very nice interface between sort of people from my research team, contributors who are publishing there, and then people who are already organically on Medium. And yeah, I think the quality of comments and engagement is pretty high. I was actually a little bit surprised to see that
mm, mm.
people can find relevance in learning about, I don't know, 12th century Arabic love poetry, for example. It's not irrelevant for them.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that touches back a little bit on the storytelling as well. I feel like you've managed to really effectively connect some of these topics to, I don't know, broader parts of people's lives, which is really essential.
And actually, I just reminded one thing that I was actually asked to speak about, so I should just mention this really quickly. The one thing that I did that's kind of the transition from maybe thinking of global literary theory as just like a research project to thinking of it as a Medium publication was applying for an ISSN, and people can learn about this. I have an article about it. It's not something maybe that's widely discussed, but it's just worth knowing that if you have a publication on Medium, certainly in the UK, but I think in most parts of the world, you can apply similarly to like a book. A book has an ISBN, and ISSN is what is the equivalent for a journal. And as long as it's, it has contributors, is regularly updated, it's eligible to get that. And you have to go to your like national library. So that would be the Library of Congress, or in my case, the British Library. And what that means it's different for every single country, but basically it means that um, can potentially be an additional source of income for contributors, because when something's published with an ISSN, if they register that publication, they have reproduction rights. Anyway, it's a whole niche area, but I think for people who are academics who have like a project in mind, it's something they would want to know about. It's a way of kind of adding value for
Yeah.
contributors.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, and the value that conveys to contributors is just like an extra sense of authority, of like recognition. Is that why it's worth kind of jumping through those very small hoops
I
to
think
get this work?
yes, and so then once you get the ISSN, it's then registered. The journal is actually registered on the library's website. Like it's in their catalog. It's not. It's a
Mm.
print. It's an online publication, so there's no print copy, but it appears in catalogs. So yes, it has this kind of recognition. It's treated as like something that has long-term value.
Fantastic. Well, we in the resources that we'll send out, I think we included your article. There's a little bit more
Oh, thank you.
information for people who
Mhm.
are curious about
Great.
that. And I think something, I feel like Rebecca, you sort of opened our eyes to this. I think it's a thing that we're thinking about as well. How can we help support that process, or at least provide resources for people who are curious to go that route to do that work? Super interesting. Appreciate it. Well, Enrique, I wanted to come back to an earlier topic. It's been threaded throughout, but I'm curious to just hear you talk a little bit more about your approach to using Medium as in the classroom as a way to connect and interact with your students and lead classes.
Yeah, what I do, I mean, what I found, I teach in a business school. Everything or most things are case based or case oriented, and I don't know if I can talk about this in front of Karin. I mean, she's the goddess of cases, of case studies. What I started to realize is my problem with Harvard cases, with the average Harvard case, and I've been educated at Harvard to use Harvard cases myself. So I love the material. Is that it's very difficult for me to put my hands on a case that is less than, let's say, 6 months old.
Mm,
And I teach innovation. So what I find is that what my students love is to discuss things in class that are happening right now. So that's what I find interesting when I write articles. I think about some of the articles as mini cases. Again,
mm,
sorry, Karin, I know it's not a case. A case takes much more work and everything. But writing a mini case, a couple of pages or something, and filling it with links. Oops, sorry, with lots of links. I put more and more, lots of links because it takes longer to write to read the links than to read my article. And what I tell my students is, don't worry about my article. My article could be my opinion, my position on that. This is not important. What I want you to read is the links. Go for the links. I also use the links as my personal file. If I want to discuss this in the class, these are the articles that I used to write it. So when you read one of my articles on Medium, it has way more links than the average. And this is because I'm trying to get my students to make them familiar with my sources, etc. Because I mean, on a regular day, I read articles from all these places, and all these places they need to ring a bell for them. They come from very different backgrounds, so now they are in business, technology, innovation. They need to read all this. Of course, I don't claim I read all the whole Washington Post or New York Times. I tell them, hey, read the technology section of the Guardian or the New York Times. Or no, I'm not telling them to read the whole thing, but they gain a lot of familiarity with the types of sources that you need to use when you discuss something on a business setting. Okay, so what I try to do is to build this type of archive for me and resources for them. And of course, when I publish it, I publish the article and I give them the friend link. I always use the friend link. I mean, my articles are typically closed, that you have to be a subscriber if you want to read them. But with my students, and when I share them in social media, I use the friend link. I think I am overusing the friend link a little bit, but the thing is, of course, if I wanted to share the link that forces people to subscribe, I may be making, perhaps I could be making more money, but that's not my point. I mean, my point here is to get my articles distributed. So I tend to abuse the friend link on that regard to be able to make them accessible to more people.
Totally understand. I mean, it's part of the reason that friend links exist. We know there are a lot of use cases where people do want to paywall a story, but also have an avenue to get it to people with bypassing the paywall. And it's a perfect use of that, Enrique. I appreciate it. Um, Excellent. Well, I think we've got time for maybe one more group question from me, and then we'll start heading towards the Q&A from the audience. Just a quick reminder, if you have a question, look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a Q&A section. Put it in there. It'll open up slightly different dialog box, but that way our team can see it and we'll pull it out. But don't put it in the chat section. And again, if we do choose one of your questions, we'll call you up to the stage to be able to ask it here, kind of in the world of Zoom and the mediated space that we all exist in these days. Well, I think as a last one, and I think you've all given so much advice and I think insight to the folks on the call today, and so appreciate that. But I'm curious, sort of to end on this note of one specific piece of advice you might give to an academic writer on Medium. And Carin, maybe we can start with you.
So maybe my advice is echoes some of what Enrique is saying about his process. So I'm a professional writer. I write all my life. I write out of passion. For me, it's very difficult to write. And so I tinker with my kid, it takes me a month to write them. There's a lot of tinkering. So my one piece of advice is, don't think that you need to write at a particular speed. Don't think that you need to sound a particular way. I would say resist the urge of using Gen AI because it really doesn't build this emotional resonance, I don't think, with individuals. But combine it with research to get, some credibility. But I think my piece of advice is get going. Don't overthink it. Don't get too stuck in your links. If one person reads your research and it changes their lives, that's tremendous impact. So I would encourage many of you on the call to get going. We want to hear from you, and the more diverse this marketplace of ideas, the better off we all collectively are.
That's great.
It's funny that you mentioned generative AI. Of course, if you are going to write on Medium, is because you like writing. So it doesn't make any sense for me to subcontract your writing. If you love writing, for me, it doesn't make any sense to ask an algorithm to write it for you. However, I found a very interesting use for generative AI, which is with you're probably familiar with Notebook LM. Notebook LM is from Google, and it creates, one of the possibilities it offers you is to create a podcast. You feed it with an article and it creates a podcast for you with two hosts, artificial hosts, always the same two voices that engage in a discussion, and the discussion is extremely well done. What I found was that if I was to feed Notebook LM with my own article, the one I wrote, and then with the sources one by one, the podcast that was created was very interesting, very insightful, well done, professional looking, knowing as I know that I wasn't going to make a podcast myself. I'm not a podcaster. I'm not into that. It would take me a lot of time. I'm too perfectionist. It would impossible. So since I'm not going to create a podcast myself, creating a podcast with this tool and publishing it under my main article on Medium allows many of my students to choose the listening way. Okay, instead of reading the article, or besides reading the article, they connect to the podcast. I publish my podcast all over the place, in Spotify, in Amazon Music, in Apple Podcasts. I call it Enrique Dans for Dummies. And if you want to listen not just to the article being read aloud, because Medium has that already, allows you to do that, but a podcast with two hosts and all that, and it's very entertaining, and many of my students actually love it. So I found it a very interesting use of generative AI.
That is fascinating. Rebecca, were you going to say something? I feel like I maybe want to have like a little generative AI jog before we come back to the actual last question. But I'm curious kind of how generative AI is maybe showing up for all of you. This is a super interesting use case, Enrique. And I used Google LM recently for a research project and was kind of blown away by how good that podcast feature was. But Rebecca, is there something in the generative AI space that's
not
okay.
I'm very intrigued, but no, not on the topic.
Carin, what about for you? I'm curious if it's showing up in your work. It's, I don't know, it's one of the biggest topics right now on Medium and kind of in the world, and I'm sure that there's some impacts in various ways across your space as well.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we found helpful also at the school is to use it to an alternative persona. So one great challenge in order to get your research out or point of view is that you may not know how somebody might react to it. So for example, if I were writing a case on a ballerina, I might put in, if I were a ballerina, what would I worry about when a new creative director comes in? And so I think it's a useful tool in order to share with me perspectives that I might have missed. Or you can put your writing in and say, you know, is this accessible? Are there a couple of sentences that are really inaccessible? Are there a few terms that I should be defining? So I think as an intelligent editor, as a smarter, as a friend, it's okay. I think if you outsource it, it really does feel very impersonal to me. So I would, you know, I know it works for a lot of people. The other thing is that if we're all using it, we will all flood the air. And it's a little bit like entrepreneurship. It's lowering the barriers. And so nobody will be reading anything. And then everybody will be putting everybody else's, you know, pieces into Gen AI in order to generate comments. And then you really are in a dystopian kind of philosophy. So I think the more human we can try to stay, the better. Maybe the better off we will be, but it could be naive and old school.
For me, important part is to be transparent. I mean, at the end of my article, I put this: if you want to listen, if podcasting is your thing,
Yes.
I have this AI generated podcast. Of course,
Yes.
it's all over the place in Spotify and Apple Podcast. I tell them that this is AI generated, and I also tell them that my article is not. My article is from my own brain and hands on the keyboard and all that, so they understand they are not talking to a bot. They are talking to a person.
Yeah. I don't know. I could go off for another 30 minutes on Gen AI. It's certainly for a platform like Medium, we see both the advantages of certain use cases and the disadvantages of others. And we're very invested in making sure that the exchange of ideas that's happening on the platform itself is about human writing, interacting with other human folks. And that it's very odd that here we are in 2025 and that's a stance that a platform has to make, but it's also true. And yet there are also these other really valuable use cases for the technology. Anyway, we're all kind of in that soup at the moment together. Well, want to come back to the sort of advice question, and Enrique, toss it to you. And maybe your advice was around this way of using Google Notebook. But if you have, I don't know, if you have another piece for folks using Medium, curious what it would be for academic writers who are just maybe getting started.
No, the notebook LM was not an advice, it's just a curiosity, something I started a few months ago. I started to produce it because it's really no increment in terms of work. It takes you, I don't know, 10 minutes to put the podcast together. And it's something I'm trying. If people react, I mean, so far I'm getting some tractions. I have some 200 subscribers in the different platforms, which is almost nothing. But my students also appreciate it. And the younger they are, the better. When I'm teaching masters in management, which are coming right away from the university, they love the podcasting thing. MBAs are a little bit less into it, but I mean, I find it interesting, but this is not my advice. My advice is for people who think about Medium in an academic setting is, first of all, try to provide as much links as you can. As I said before, the more links, the better, because they give people references. They tell people what you've been reading in order to write what you wrote. It's a little bit of a paradox. What you're actually telling people is, go away. Is, yes, read me, but the best thing you can do is, besides reading me, click here and find out what drove me into writing this. The more you invite people to go away and read other things, the more they will consider you a reference, and the more they will come back. So using links and abusing links, I'm even linking to Wikipedia when I mention certain terms, etc., or people or stuff like that. Give people the extra layer of information to just click, go to Wikipedia, and understand what I'm talking about. I think it's very interesting. And the other piece of advice is be generous. Share, and share. I mean, I write all my articles with Creative Commons. I don't use copyright, I use copyleft, which means everyone can use my articles, recycle them if you want. I use the less restrictive version of the Creative Commons license, which is the CC BY, Creative Commons BY. Why? Because I want my ideas to move around, to be shared, etc. So the more the less restrictive I am, I find that the easier it is to circulate them and talk about them, etc. So I think it's a good idea to invite people to build on top of that and use copyleft. I've always been a fan of copyleft in academic environments, and but on Medium I found it when at the beginning you guys started to offer the possibility to label your articles as Creative Commons. I found it extremely interesting, and I publish all my articles with CC BY.
That is, it's fascinating. It's built in at the story level. You can choose as an author your settings. It's a part of the way that we approach rights on Medium is to put as much control into the hands of the authors as possible. So really interesting to hear that, Enrique. Well, Rebecca, also for you, I'm curious, any words of advice for folks getting started on Medium?
Definitely. I think the main advice or that I would say is with respect to kind of the subject of for people trying to figure out what do they write at all, how do they start? I would say go back to the beginning of yourself. I think everyone who is in any way aligned with academia, I mean, one thing that defines us is that, you know, we obviously have been through an educational system. We have papers, theses, a lot of stuff that may or may not be published. And, you know, for me, one of the kind of most groundbreaking experiences was to go back through my previous work that, you know, maybe I'd published it. And then when I published it, it was a line in my CV, but no one actually seemed to have read it, and to reshape it for a Medium audience. And it literally gave a second life, you know, to something that was kind of dead. But then it's, you know, now it's alive, and that's an amazing transformative experience. And I think just so, and also the advantage of kind of going back to the beginning of yourself as a scholar, that's the moment when, you know, you first fell in love with reading or whatever it is that you do. And that kind of love is exactly what I think readers on Medium are looking for. And so by connecting with that part of yourself, I think that's the best way to position your work for a Medium audience. And I would also say, you know, never underestimate what's relevant for a Medium audience, because I've really been astonished by the way, as long as the language, you know, as long as it doesn't contain like jargon that we don't need, I think, you know, no idea is too challenging for a Medium audience. They are a pretty smart group of people who are willing to take the time and to give really constructive feedback as well. So don't underestimate the intelligence of the Medium community.
That's a fantastic, I feel like fantastic advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the other thing is that it gives people an additional particularly your students, an additional dimension. I mean, my obsession when I discuss something in a class is to take the issue out of the class and get them to imagine what they would do in a real setting, if they were making a real decision in a real company and all that. So that's why bringing all this external information is important for them. But also, it's interesting as a professor what they see when they realize that the thing that you are discussing with them has been published someplace else and has been exposed to other people. It gives you an authority that improves the way they see you. Okay, it's like, okay, this guy is relevant for me because he's my teacher, he's going to grade me and all that. But besides being here in this class, he also writes for a wider audience. He gets comments from people all over the world, etc. And this brings the relevance to a different place for them. They realize that what they are discussing is for real, is something that is happening, is something that is being published in many places. There's a reference all over the place, and you are also discussing it in the open. And that, I think, gives a reality to the academic setting.
I think that seems very true from the feedback that we've received from people as well. I love that. I love that advice. Well, I want to transition over to some of the questions that we've been getting from the audience and invite a few people up to ask them. Again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A section. We'll be patrolling, pulling things out from there. But I had an interesting question, I think related to this, the idea of expanding one's audience, from Shara Benison. Shara, do you want to come up and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My question was really around amplification and getting more eyeballs on the content that's published on Medium. So I put 2 questions in the chat. Does anyone have tips for building their reader audience on Medium or expanding readership of their pieces once they're posted? And then separately, does Medium have any insight on how they choose which stories are included in the daily Medium newsletter? Thanks.
Great. Well, I can speak to that second piece, but curious what
For
you
the
think.
first part, what I can tell you is be patient. I mean, it doesn't. You don't build an audience overnight. It takes a while. It goes article by article. Some articles achieve more popularity, and some of the people stay with you and stick to your publication. And the other thing is boost by boost. Well, sometimes you get touched by the magic wand, you get your article boosted, and it does make a difference. It makes a significant difference. And then you realize that every time you get boosted, you get an inflow of people that some of them decide to stick to your publication. But be patient. At the beginning, it feels like you're being read by yourself, by your mom, and only these two, no one else. But it builds up. Trust me, it does.
So I share on LinkedIn, which is a professional platform that I use, and because I write for managers and I write about human sustainability, it's a good place to get a different kind of feedback. I'm not big on X, but I do share there. And then recently I dug out my Facebook account to share there also. So I think you can think about different places that you're already there and then share there. I would say engaging with the comments probably is good for building readership. People take the time to comment. I try to really take the time to respond. Sometimes it gets overwhelming. And then also support other people on Medium, and they'll support you back. I think there's a fair bit of reciprocity. Enrique talked about sourcing. So when I write other pieces for other publications, I will refer to my Medium piece as a source. So that's another way. If you're published in other places, it's not an academic publication, but you can certainly draw some attention that way.
Also, when you answer to comments, it's important to clap to clap for the comment that you're answering, because that makes the comment visible underneath your article. So and people like that a lot. I mean, if you are taking the job to answer and reply to the comment and all that, make it visible. I think it's also important.
Also, I can speak to the question of readers. I could completely resonate with what Enrique said about just waiting. Sometimes it might even take months, in my case, to get like really, really good comments, but it's worth the wait. That the great thing is that you in Medium, you can put your work out there and then just move on, and then suddenly you get this great surprise. It's like a letter from someone, a good friend out of the blue a few months. So it's really worthwhile. Also, then I think speaking to something I saw in the chat, someone was asking about DOI having a digital identifier for what you publish on Medium. I think what I would say is that you can, as far as I know, the answer is it doesn't. But I think from my perspective, the best way to think of Medium is like part of a broader ecosystem where, yes, you publish your work on the Medium platform, but then that thing that you have published, it can have a life in other contexts. And so you can get a DOI. What I would do in that case is you just take a PDF of that publication on Medium and you upload it to a platform that does provide DOIs. This is like a permanent link, and like Knowledge Commons there are many free scholarly platforms. I think every discipline has their own, but I think it's good to think of Medium as interacting with other platforms that broaden the reach of what you've published on Medium. It's not like a kind of isolated thing that exists apart from everything else. It's something that interacts with other ways in which our work is read in the world.
Mhm.
And I totally agree with, sorry. I totally agree with Karin that it's important to share it in social media and all that. I do it systematically. As soon as I finish writing, the first thing I do is to publish it on X, on LinkedIn, which were now I'm also using Blue Sky. And Facebook, which I don't use anymore, but I still have some 30,000 people following me there. So I publish it there just in case. I think it's the only moment during the day when I enter Facebook just to share my article and then go away. I don't even have it installed in my smartphone anymore because I don't like Mark Zuckerberg much. But I still use it to distribute my writings.
Yeah, I feel like that complementary nature is very much what Medium is building towards. I think LinkedIn has come up a couple of times in the call, and like there is a real that's a very specific network. You want to use that. I think a lot of the most successful writers that we see on Medium in the sort of academic world and just really more broadly do have that approach of thinking about a whole ecosystem, not necessarily just Medium. That can take some time. You know, I don't say that in sort of a flippant way. That's not, you know, that is time and energy need to go into that kind of work. And I do think that a lot of the platforms have started to make it easier. We're constantly looking ways to make it easier to share from Medium out to those others. But we have a number of people who have a Substack and also publish some of their stories on Medium, and they look at them just as different tools to achieve different ends, and that I think is a really effective strategy. I will touch really quickly on the Medium newsletter question. So for folks who don't know, we have a daily newsletter that we put together on Medium called the Medium Newsletter, a very clever branding strategy on our part. And really, it's meant to be, you know, sort of at a glance, a lot of the best stories that are happening on Medium in any given day. Of course, there are tens of thousands of stories that are published on Medium every day. And so the way that the team approaches it, we're really looking for what we call internally the Medium version of a story that you wouldn't see in traditional media. And that could be relevant to what's happening in the news. It isn't always. We have a number of obsessions that we have in the newsletter, often around work, around getting better at work, around self-improvement, around some of the big topics of the day like AI. And so we're looking for moments where we can connect the writing and the writers on the platform really just with the big topics that people are curious about in the world. I think that's one of the things that Medium is really good at and valuable for, that you can have someone who is an expert on presidential transitions write a story about the history of presidential transitions in a moment when that's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds. So I know that's not, you know, there's not a formula for writing, and I wouldn't say that it's even necessarily useful for people to be thinking about how do I write in order to get into the Medium newsletter. It's one of many channels, many ways that we reach the readership on Medium. But in terms of kind of what we're looking for there, that's it. We really are having an eye open for where we can connect, you know, relevance and in some cases timeliness with the quality of a firsthand expert perspective on some part of what's happening in the world. Great. Well, I'm going to go to, we've got just a little bit more time. We'll see how this one, how the answer goes, if we have time for two, or if this will be our last one. But we have a question here from Jules Boyle. Jules, if you're there, you want to jump on and ask your question.
Yeah, I wrote two questions, so I'm not sure which one you
Oh,
want me to. Yeah.
I thank you for that. I had the one about how people in different stages can approach Medium.
Yeah, so that was something I'm curious about because I really am interested in like medium in terms of like science communication, but also like I am very early on in my research career. Like I'm currently interviewing for PhD programs, but like I obviously don't have a PhD yet. So how would you recommend someone like in that stage, like very interested in research and the science communication aspect of it, would approach writing on Medium?
For some universities, it's extremely important. In our case, we consider ourselves a research university, i.e. university. We publish a lot of research and all that. We have a lot of research faculty members, etc. But we also strive to have people who can teach well and explain the relevance of their research to a wider audience. So when you find a PhD candidate or a teaching candidate, a professor, you're looking for a professor in a certain area, and that person writes on Medium, it provides you with an additional dimension that will look very well. Medium, Substack, or some other place where they publish on a regular basis. It makes a very nice addition in their application. I would say that for us, it's kind of the place where we look for. Although normally these people include that in their information, in their resume, so it's easy to find normally.
I might piggyback on some.
I just follow up really quickly on that. I mean, I would say that also it's good though to make sure that you are publishing, you know, the peer reviewed stuff. In my experience, it's easier to draw Medium material for Medium from things I've already published, and you know that have been sort of by peer reviewed. That's taken care of, and so you know there's no kind of competition between the two. So I would make sure that both are being taken care of, especially if you're interviewing for jobs.
the piggyback that I was going to make with Rebecca was this, she said, I went back to sort of first principles, like what is on my resume, what have I done? And maybe for you, this is a way to think about, who are you? What is it that you're passionate about? How do you present yourself? What is your relationship to science? So Enrique focuses on sort of the way that's going to look to the world, but maybe this is a way for you to look into your own world as you embark on your career. And congratulations on the PhD. That's such an undertaking. So bravo.
That's a fantastic point. Mhm.
Well, I think maybe we're at time. I could talk for another few hours with each of you, and we got so many questions that we didn't quite have time to get to. But thank you to the audience for sending them in and being so engaged, and thank you so much to our panelists for taking your time out of a, I'm sure, a busy day to join us and share your insights. Really, really grateful for having you here. If you're curious, I think on that sort of to that last question, I think worth getting into the resources, finding Carin, Rebecca, and Enrique's profiles on Medium. A nice thing about Medium is you can go back to their earliest posts and watch how things have changed over time. Like you can really, with even a slightly close reading, get a sense of how writers on Medium have sort of changed their approach or explored other avenues over time. And I think there's a lot to learn in the archives there. And we're going to be working on more and better ways to make discovering academic writing on Medium easier for people, especially new folks who are coming in. So hope to make that journey for you that much more simple in the future. Just a reminder on the resources section, again, if you want to click over there, we're going to shut down the webinar in a few minutes, but you can grab anything that's over there, a bunch of links, a PDF around academic writing that I think can be useful. We will email that out to you as well, so it'll be in your inboxes if you want access to that. We would love to hear from you. Curious about both the seminar today, but also broadly your questions, comments, concerns. So we're always available at academics@medium.com, and the team who's working on this particular part of our world is there and will respond. Lastly, I have news to break. Announcing here for the first time, we're going to be doing, as a follow-up event to this one, a office hours for academics on Medium, focused on publishing your work with us. So we will follow up with dates and times on this, but we want to see this as a place where people who have a piece or have an idea that they're thinking about writing on Medium related to their life and work as an academic, but they want some help and feedback. Our team will be there. We'll do live Q&As. We can help people work on their pieces to actually, kind of take this first step maybe towards publishing something on Medium. We want to make that as easy as possible, and this could be a really fun way to do that. So we will, I think the link is in the resources section right now, but we'll be following up with that also on an email. I think that's it. Thank you all so much. So grateful again to the panelists, Rebecca, Carin, Enrique. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all of the generosity and I don't know, just the open spirit you have in sharing your thoughts and your world on Medium. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. Thank you also, Carly, our producer backstage, making this whole thing happen so smoothly and wonderfully. Really, really grateful for your work as well. And hope to see you all on Medium. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Take care,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.